the ability to do this across every platform, because that would be really, really
That would
convenient.
be a game changer. I
It really
mean,
would be. Yeah.
it would have to be a lawyer with some with some that's pretty tech savvy, because I imagine,
Yeah. I think that there's a few, there's definitely going to be some tricks to it, but whoever can figure it out, I think is definitely the one. Sorry, that was the live stream interjecting, because now we're on YouTube. I'm just going to fill in the thumbnail here and the title that I'm doing now, but we are technically live at this point. All right. And we try to get somewhat current pictures for our thumbnails. Paul Jackson Jr., he's like said, hey, let's get something that's at least in the same decade. Because I think one of the ones that we took was like, from like the 90s or something like that.
Oh wow! Hey,
Yeah.
Little throwback picture.
Yeah.
Prime.
Yeah. Well, most people are the opposite to him. They want to always look, although I think since I've known you, and even since I've known who you were, you look exactly the same. So
man, well, listen,
you have good genetics.
We're trying to maintain our youth over here, man. It's a mentality, though, Mason. I tell you.
Well, most people don't do it as gracefully as you do, and you're a family man, and you got kids and all that stuff, and that certainly for some can take its toll.
Oh well, if the tell-all signs would be hair, as you can see, that left me a long time ago. So.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that it's a very distinguished look.
Well, we have to make it work. I don't really have any.
You don't have any choice. All right, so cool. So I got us now on the gallery view. We already got some folks coming in. Cool. All right, so let's now. I'm going to bring it in on the Instagram side.
Okay.
So I'll bring it in, and then if you can just search for me, we can on the on the top there, and just request to join, and then we can do it that way.
I see it. So here, let me.
All right, I see you. All right, and then we're live. We should be live here on the gram. All right.
There we are.
Yeah.
Multiple screens, all of this good stuff.
Yeah. I just want him down. Do you still hear me on Instagram? I don't know.
I do, but I'm turning down the volume.
Yeah, I was just turning it down because I don't want the cardio. I mean, the cardio is probably not going to pick much of it up, but just want to make it clean for Hunter when he goes to mix this thing later.
He's got his work cut out for him.
Yeah. No, it's super easy with that. As long as there's that sync, because sometimes we haven't done that, and then he's kind of trying to look around, and with back and forth, it can sometimes be hard to get the timing quite right. Yeah. Cool.
I get it.
All right. Well, Erick, thank you so much for joining me today on Memorial Day weekend. I hope you're having a good one so far with your family, sheltered in place.
I am. It's been just a long, continuous holiday vacation for the last few months for me. So,
Yeah, I mean, you've
definitely done our share of barbecuing.
Oh yeah. My wife, in fact, is getting prepared. We have some short ribs that we're gonna barbecue later.
Good stuff. Right?
So I think it's been good. Also been interesting because I usually work from home a couple days a week, but my wife never works from home because she's an elementary school principal. So having Principal Jenna working in the room next door, it's an interesting negotiation to do it digitally.
I am not a child. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. So it's cool, but yeah, it's really good to have you. If people are not familiar with Erick, I mean, he's one of my favorite guitar players, and certainly is really established. Played with Michael Jackson, Beyonce, Dixie Chicks, Kanye West, Jay-Z, Toni Braxton, Whitney Houston. I mean, I could just every name is just almost supersedes the next in terms of just the quality of their music, and you've certainly had a big part of that, and you've won, or you've been nominated for Grammys and Emmys, right?
Yeah, we won Grammys, Emmy nominations. In fact, that was one of my first like notable accomplishments when I moved to LA. I was so proud, so undeserving I felt, but nonetheless, it was a it was an indicator that I think I made the right decision in moving out here. So
Yeah. What was the song that got the nomination?
So it was a movie on HBO called, it was an original movie called Dancing in September, and it was the theme song for that particular movie. So it was the artist Cy Smith, and yeah, it was myself, my buddy Erick Walls from the band Lettuce, good longtime buddy of mine.
Yeah.
Another guy by the name of Mark Sparks, who I kind of got my start with, and it seemed like it was a fluke at the time, but we recorded it. This was back in the days of 2-inch tape, so
yeah,
recorded it, sent the reels off, and we're like, hey, it's in the movie. Hey, what does that mean? It's gonna be a big deal. So next thing we know, when Emmy season came around, I was like, oh.
Yeah.
So I was like, wow, that's how it works. It's that easy.
Yeah. Well, most people don't get the benefit, I guess, of coming to LA and always starting on the top.
Well, listen, it's it was definitely quite a journey, man. But such a blessing, man. I really just think back, over the years, and really in retrospect, and just think it's been such a blessing. I tell everybody, it's, for me, it's definitely not a talent thing. There's so many amazing players and so many just amazing musicians out here. But, I just try to be a person that, people want to be around for the most part. And, I think that in itself, will open a lot of doors. So, I think, I'm an okay musician, but I pride myself in being a better person than a musician. So.
Yeah. So I know that you went to, you're from North Carolina, but you went to Berklee, and then did you move directly from going to Berklee to LA?
Not exactly. So I was at Berklee for about a year and a half, and I had some opportunities. And the funny thing about Berklee was, it was like, I remember growing up, hearing the name Berklee, and then there was this particular CNN expose on Berklee, and that just sealed the deal. I was like, I gotta go there, So it was like a dream of mine. But I was already working and stuff before, before I went. But nonetheless, I knew I still should have gone, and I did. So I went, met a lot of amazing musicians, pretty much lifelong friends, people I talk to on almost a daily basis. So, getting up there, I was like, oh man, this is great. So, and to be honest with you, I think when you look at a school like that, or any really like serious musical institution, I think what people are actually paying for is the networking aspect.
Yeah.
That's the only time in your life you'll be surrounded by people, within your age range that have that same level of dedication and drive and, passion for music that you do. A lot, it really is a place like that. It's a bunch of people from, their respective little towns or cities. It's like the best of the best in, one place. And it's like, oh, you're the guy, you're me from another place. But no, it was such an amazing experience. And like I said, like everybody that I kind of met there and was able to forge relationships with there. They still exists to this day. So that was a very, very, very great time in my life. But
Yeah.
you know, once I left, you know, I had some opportunities that took me away, and then you know some of that stuff didn't pan out. So I found myself back at home, and it was pretty funny because this was the early days of like digital, like basically like Pro Tools. Pro Tools was in its infancy or getting to a point where it was functional, you know. So um, there was a church back home that I played. You know, I'd been playing there for a few years prior to leaving and going to school, but um, they gave me a job editing the sermons. So this was like I used this program, Digital Performer, which used to be like they started off as a sequencer for Pro Tools, and then they got into audio themselves. But anyway, I used that program to cut down the sermons so they could fit on the radio, and that was my day job. And you know, it was music related, but I was like, you know, I found myself like I would commute back and forth from one city to the next because I'm from Durham, North Carolina. The church was in Raleigh, and you know it was about 30 minutes, 30 miles away. We're averaging that way, and in a place like that, you know, if we were to compare it to LA, that'd be like a hour and a half, 2 hour commute because it's country miles as we call it.
Right.
So I remember distinctively sitting on the freeway in traffic, rush hour traffic in the morning. I'm like, yo, it's down there. I have to go to LA. Like I'm not cut out to do this commuting thing and all this stuff. Not for this at least, you know. So, you know, first opportunity that that presented itself, I jumped at it and moved to LA, you know.
Yeah,
man.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting transition. Eric, one request from some of the commenters is there any way to increase the volume of the microphone that's going to Zoom? Some people are saying it's a little bit low.
Sure thing.
Without affecting your whatever your recording source is for your Pro Tools.
Yeah, that's separate.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think
that
that's
should be a little better. Yes.
Yeah. Let us know in the comments there if that works better. It sounds better. It sounds a little more forward now. So once you moved to LA, what was sort of like? What do you feel like was sort of the first big break that you got? I mean, we know about the Emmy nomination for the HBO thing, but what do you vintage you as a guitar player? Do you feel like it was a culmination of different people, or do you feel like there was a single sort of event that sort of cemented you? Because depending on who we talk to, you know, like Michael Thompson identified kind of working with Michael Bolton and doing that intro to When a Man Loves a Woman as sort of being the time that really cemented him, whereas Paul Jackson Jr. is like, this was an incremental thing that it would just built upon, you know, just sort of doing a lot of sessions. Where do you feel like kind of you fit in that spectrum?
Well, it leans more towards it just kind of building up. I mean, when I basically came out here with a bunch of people from back in North Carolina. They had a record label called Soul Life Records, and we had a label deal with Atlantic Records. And you know, my dream was to, you know, I've always, you know, done writing and production and stuff, and that was really like, you know, my focus. You know, I've always played and I love to play, but I'm like, yeah, I really want to, you know, so I linked with these guys, and a notable artist, Anthony Hamilton, he was on the label. We used to all live in the same house and all this stuff. And the first artist that came out, which coincidentally was the last artist that came out on that label, first and last, her name was Sunshine Anderson. She had this big hit called Heard It All Before. And I mean, the album sold maybe 1 million copies based upon that single alone, but that was like my first like really professional break, you know, with writing and production and all that stuff. So, you know, through that, and that, you know, the music business is such a small business, but, you know, through that kind of camp, I was able to meet so many people. So it was like, you know, when I first got here, we kind of just hit the ground running. It was like, okay, we're in this studio, say we're, you know, up in, it was a studio all in Hollywood on Larchmont called Skip Sailors.
Okay.
really nice room. And, you know, from there, I would just, you know, I met like DJ Quick, and, you know, we forged a relationship. And I met, what's this guy, Devontae Swing from Jodeci. He was, you know, they're from back home, but I didn't know him. So, you know, we were able to forge a relationship. And, you know, just countless others, you know, just by seemingly like random encounters, like, oh, hey, you know, who are you? What are you doing? You know, and at that time we had the first social network in the way of the two-way pagers. So, you know, it was you know, share your contacts, and, you know, we would stay in touch that way. But, you know, so through those guys, I eventually started working with this group called the Johnson Sisters from LA. They were on DreamWorks when they had a record division, and they were managed and signed to Ronald Isley of the Isley Brothers. And by working with them, you know, I kind of hit it off with Ronald. He's like, hey man, would you be interested in playing with the group? And it was like, really? Because at that moment, I remember distinctively going through my father's like album collection, probably 10 years prior, and discovering really who they were. I knew the music, like, you know, the samples, Today Is a
Sure.
Good Day, and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, of course I do. So that was really like, you know, my foot in the door as far as gigs, like a real gig, you know what I mean? So I just kind of, you know, branched off from there. But, you know, once again, the music business is super small. It's smaller than, you know, a lot of people might think, in that everybody's connected in some way or another from the top to the bottom.
Right.
So, no, it just, you know, it was just me kind of working and just, you know, continue to network and, you know, just meeting people. And it was, you know, I think that was like the I want to say the big break, but I was already kind of doing some things. So you know, it all happened simultaneously, you know.
So back in those days, like early Erick Walls LA days, what did your rig look like at that time when you came out here?
Well, I had some interesting gear choices. I brought with me to LA. I had and I still actually have this stuff, the Soldano Series 2 preamp.
All right.
The purple guy.
Yeah.
Which, you know, had two channels, the dirty and clean.
Yeah.
I had this really terrible DOD G10 effects processor that I would get my like reverbs and delays from. And I had this MIDI switcher and Crybaby, Wah. I think I had some really terrible Boss. It was called the Metalizer. It was like this digital kind of distortion type of thing. The only reason I used it because it had like this this delay kind of overdrive thing that I could get some really interesting tones out of. Nice. But that was like my direct rig. You know, I would take that. I had a little rack. We'd take that to the studios. You know, patch it through the Neves, you know, 1073s, 1081s or whatever. And I was able to, you know, cover a wide range of sounds. And that was the studio rig I had at that time, because I actually took it on the plane with me. I had this Tech 21 power engine, and it was like a powered cab. If I needed to play, you know, a gig out, I'd have that with me as well.
Right. Well, you had your tube preamp though, right, in the Soldano.
Yeah, so it sounded. I mean, it didn't sound bad, but it was, you know, as I look back, I'm like,
The Soldanos are worth some money now.
Well, the Soldano, I'm looking. They're very rare. It seems like so. Yeah. I'll never get rid of that. It's sentimental, but it's like, you know, it's a useful piece of gear. So
you should get your rack going again, Eric.
I think you know, I never say never, but you know, it sounds good. So, you know, I generally don't get rid of gear. The times that the times that I have gotten rid of stuff, I've lived to regret it. So
yeah.
That was my initial little rig here in LA, and I had other stuff back home, and I eventually brought out here, but that was
Yeah.
it. That was the first. Yeah.
When you were back in those early days, did you play on any of the Anthony Hamilton stuff?
Yeah, we did. He actually had the album that was that he recorded on that label Soul Life. It came out some years later, but during that same time, we got a couple of licenses. We did a song in the Baby Boy, that movie Baby Boy with Tyrese.
Yeah. I remember the cover. He was like on a bicycle.
So I did a song. I wrote and produced again with my buddy Erick Walls from Lettuce. We did and another buddy of mine from back home, Ron Nephew Feemster, who's a really well-known established producer. We all wrote a tune called Love and War with Macy Gray. Macy Gray was bubbling at that time.
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah.
We did that, and it was like, oh man, once again, this was early days. I'm like, oh, it's that easy. Songs go in movies, and
yeah. I remember that.
It was really when I really look back, it's such a remarkable time, and such a glorious time to be in LA, because that was kind of the tail end of that era of that music business, of the music business as well. So, man, it was quite a journey, back then.
Yeah, man, Macy Gray had such an iconic voice for the time. It was like so smoky and
coincidentally, she can't turn it off. Her singing voices are talking, her speaking voice as well.
Yeah.
She actually managed that artist that I was talking about earlier, Sunshine Anderson. So it was like, her managing her gave me an opportunity to not only, work with Sunshine, but, work with Macy. She would always be around. So it was like, oh,
yeah. I mean, she had a couple of hits there.
She was big. She was a hot item,
Yeah.
I remember, she swept like the MTV Awards one year, and this is that era. So it's like, oh wow.
Some of those, it's interesting, like some of I mean, that's really the way that she talks, but I know that there's like some voices that are more like put on like more of an effect. And it's hard to maintain that, when you see some of the singers that, then they get in their 60s or their 50s, it's sort of like they can't do it. They can't do that anymore because it's such a strain.
Well,
although sorry, go ahead. After you, please.
No, I was saying she has that going for her. I think she can sustain that character voice that's actually a real voice.
Yeah. Who's somebody who surprised me that they still sound incredible. I mean, he's a great musician, and his voice is iconic. But Michael McDonald, who you've worked with, like he still sounds really great, and it seems like his voice would he's got so much power. A lot of time on voices like that.
Yeah, he's a powerhouse, man. And I always say, music is an extension. Music is an extension of one, of the person. And Michael, like the soulfulness that he has in his voice and his, just that crooning, that's like his personality. The times I've worked with, he's really that guy. Like he's like the sweetest guy and just like the warmest guy. And it comes out and it's it's amazing. And I definitely feel that way about instrumentalists as well. Like it's generally when you have silly people that you generally play silly stuff. You clever people play clever stuff. It's kind of that type of thing. But yeah, Michael, he's such an amazing. Stood the test of time. But he sounds just as good today.
Yeah,
he's lowered the keys on a couple of tunes, but
I think
play night after night. But no, he's great, man.
Yeah, I get it, man. I mean, it's the same for everybody. Like even with John Mayer, like he doesn't do and I mean he's not as old obviously as Michael McDonald, but like he doesn't do Change the World really anymore or not Change the World, Waiting for the World to Change anymore. Because it's really? Like it's sort of like he's had some vocal surgeries and it's kind of like at the edge of the range that
I get it.
And so there's everybody's got that song. Although I still want to see Michael McDonald doing those peg harmonies for Steely Dan, man.
Have you seen those the making of the classic record making of series where they go in and isolate, the multi-tracks, and they did one.
Yeah.
And I mean, just those
Multi-tracks, in fact, if you want them.
And just everything is right there together. And this is before the days of Pro Tools and pitch correction. So, man, that's just God-given talent. We can't call it anything else.
Yeah. No, I mean, and he wasn't even playing. I mean, he's a great, he's a great pianist, a keyboard player too. But I don't even think he was doing any of that on any of the Steely Dan stuff. I think it was just vocals.
Yeah, amazing artist.
So after you came to LA, you had some success, initially. Were you doing mostly studio stuff at that time, or were you doing?
Yeah, I mean, I did some promo stuff with that artist Sunshine, and I would do, if somebody called me to play, I wouldn't turn down stuff, but my focus at that point was really on the studio stuff. But as the quality of live gigs got a little better, I just kind of, just fell into that a bit more.
Yeah. What was the first kind of big live or kind of big tour that you got?
Well, playing with the Isleys, we toured extensively for quite a few years. I mean, I remember we did, it's funny. We all remember the SARS pandemic of 2002, I believe.
Yeah.
So when that all blew over, it basically shut down tourism to like southern Canada. So when that all blew over, the Rolling Stones put on this concert at some kind of military base or whatever up in Toronto. It was called Toronto Rocks, and we played that concert. To this day, I think it's the largest ticketed event in Canadian history. I think it was ticketed at 800,000 people, and it was probably, I think they just eventually let people in past that, but
right.
It was almost 1 million people. So we played that show. It was AC/DC, Rolling Stones, of course, AC/DC, Rush, Justin Timberlake, the Flaming Lips, bunch of other artists, and that was like a big moment for me. I still have yet to see a crowd that large, but but we played. The funny thing about that group, and a lot of people don't realize it, a lot of interesting facts actually. They're the only group to have had success in every decade since the 1950s. Still, they still tour to this day.
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix was in the band at one time. In fact, he lived with the brothers out in Teaneck, New Jersey. So Ernie Isley is the only person who can lay claim to being taught guitar by Jimi Hendrix.
Wow.
Amazing. So but no, we had Elton John play with the band for a stretch there. So a lot of people came up through the ranks, with the Isley. So we had a great time. From there, I started working at the same time with Toni Braxton, and then she had a really good opportunity. We did a residency in Vegas for a few years, so that was like a really, really cool gig there for me.
Which casino were you at?
The Flamingo.
Okay.
Right when they kind of remodeled it and rebranded it, she was the first. She was the first. She was the first act in that new theater that they built. So
yeah.
It was a great time, and so just from there, bouncing around. I would always try to just not shoot myself in the foot, but I had a hard time saying no to quality gigs. So I would, if I could do it, I would try to make a way. So I never I think missed any of those gigs in Vegas. So I would do other stuff. I remember going to Europe in between there. So that was a good time. That was Now, I still work with her to this day. So we've had a lasting relationship. She's a sweetheart.
Yeah. Did you play on any of those albums? 'Cause I know, like in the early days, it was Michael Thompson, but did you play on any of the albums subsequently?
Not any of those era. Some of her newer stuff I've done quite a bit. In fact, her last her last hit, That's Me, that I recorded right here. That's me on there. It was a song called "As Long as I Live," and then
Yeah.
but no, none of like those signature, man. I studied those parts. Michael is a great friend of mine, and I've sat and dissected those parts. And I always tell him, thank you, man. Thank you for giving, inspiring me, giving me something to, kind of try to emulate, that I call it quality guitar playing. But he and Paul, those guys, they really revolutionized a style of guitar playing. Dan Huff, those guys. And just so many. But I remember when I was younger, I would always, with vinyl, I would always, read the credits. And, the one, like everything I really was like drawn to was like, recorded, produced, and whatnot in LA. So I was like, man, it's a phenomenal talent in LA. Never would I have, well, I did dream about it, but I didn't know how it would become a reality, that these guys would be become friends, and guys that I could call peers at to a certain extent. So it's been quite a journey, man. I really think about it. It's like, man, it's such a blessing. Guys,
yeah, well, I love what you do. Like I got to see, I guess this, I don't know, maybe 8 months ago or so, that you had me over to see some of the rehearsals with Toni Braxton, and it's really interesting to see how you adapt the parts. And actually Landon Jordan earlier this last week had like gone and listened to some of that stuff, and had like taken the way that you adapted it. And what's your approach like when you're gonna reference a record, something that Michael Thompson or whoever played it, and then you're gonna be playing that part live? Do you usually try to say, okay, well, I'm just going to learn it as exactly as on the record? But then there's these other challenges too, where like sometimes the artist might not perform it exactly the same way they did on a record. So like, what's your approach to sort of recapitulating the guitar part to work for whatever the format is?
Well, I'll say this, a hit record is a hit record. There's no improving a hit record. So with that being said, I always, approach whatever the part is, in like with respect. I'm going to learn it verbatim, and I kind of pride myself on that's one of the things that keeps it like interesting for me. Like if I can play it consistently and it sounds like the record, because as a live performer, one of the greatest compliments that you can ever receive is, man, it sounded just like the record. And one of the most painful comments to hear is, and generally, the common listener, they might not be able to tell you what was wrong, but they'll say something to the effect of, it didn't quite sound right. And that, so, you know what I mean? It's one of those things, like, you don't want to be on that side of things. So, I definitely try to make it a point to be able to, nail the parts. And if there are multiple parts, obviously you kind of have to consolidate certain, certain kind of just figures and try to figure out what's the most, signature part that's going on at the time. But, for the most part, I want to do it justice, and the biggest artists that I've ever worked with, they know their music. So they're listening for those parts. And, once again, if it's not there, they're like, hey,
Yeah. Well, working with Michael Jackson, that must have been a real big one, because you can even see like on the This Is It movie, like he really has an understanding of where stuff's supposed to fit in it.
Michael, he was kind of a freak of nature. Like, in working with him, I would, with my buddy that I talked about earlier, Ron Nephew Feemster. He's from back home, but he came out here with me as well. He started working with Michael years back, and then eventually he brought me in to start working with him. So the house that Michael died in, the Homely Hills estate off of Sunset Boulevard, he had a studio. The pool house he had converted into a studio. So we would go over there maybe 10 in the morning to 10 at night, just spending long hours. But the thing about Michael, like once that initial, like just like awe of Michael, like that initial me like being, oh, that's Michael Jackson. Michael was as normal of a person as he possibly could be, and it sounds funny when I say it, but after a while you kind of got used to him, and like, yeah, he's just a regular guy. But the thing that really struck me about him was his attention to detail. Now, Michael, he was like a stickler for parts. It was all about parts. And I remember this one instance in us coming up with this guitar figure, and I was playing on the low E string, but the song was in E, and I was in standard tuning, but the song was in E flat, and he was like, "Hey, tune your guitar down. Let's get that low note." And for somebody, he didn't play guitar, but for someone to have that understanding, or just to be thinking in that manner, I was like, wow, but
right.
Jackson, you know what I mean?
So he can hear the difference, even though it's fretted or the note that's coming out is the same. He could tell the difference between a flat tuned and a standard.
He could tell the difference. He was very much in tune. And I'd never really witnessed anybody of that caliber with that level of dedication to the creative process. It was like, he's like, no, we could do it better. We can do it better. We can, that's nice. But what else do we have? That was his thing. And it just blew me away. I'm like, wow. And, he'd be over in the corner, nobody even looking at him. He'd be over in the corner, 5 minutes in the music, beating on his chest. I'm like, Michael Jackson. That's why who he is.
Yeah. No, he was. Yeah, he certainly is a genius.
Absolutely.
Jenna, my wife, her cousin Charles, was one of the dancers on This Is It.
Oh wow.
And so he was in the movie and all that stuff, but he was like the same thing, like with the dancers. Like there were some parts where they would be able to interpret, or he would give them direct feedback, but then there was also sort of like these legacy dance moves that the background dancers would have to perform. And he was kind of talking about like, he would just talk. I mean, I don't know anything about dance or anything about movement or anything like that for that sort of stuff. But apparently there was just like certain transitions and ways that people do things, and certain ways that you're connecting different parts of the body. And he was very hands-on all that stuff. And yeah, it's incredible, and those parts are great. But some of them are really buried. Like those ones that I sent you that were all those Dan Huff tracks on Bad. I like some of those parts I can hardly even distinguish. Like when I listen to it, whole, it's really buried in there. So what do you do? How do you deal with, I mean, like presumably you didn't have those multi-tracks, and you've done some stuff for Michael Jackson, or you've done, some of the tribute stuff as well. How do you go about trying to learn those parts if you can't hardly hear them?
Well, we just, we kind of, in those instances, we kind of just rely on, in some of the, the shows that we've done, they've had really good transcribers, to actually write the parts. And, that's a talent all in itself, being able to, hear it. And for the most part, it's not like the exact part, but it's pretty dead on in terms of like, voices and stuff. So, we just try to, with my ear and somebody else's penmanship, we try to kind of nail it, and it was interesting when you shared those with me. I was like, oh man, I've been hearing, these parts for years. Well, once again, it's those things that you don't hear, but it's like they're subtle, but everything in those records, everything's there for a purpose, and that's the really amazing. Like it's more like stuff is more felt than heard, and especially the chorusy guitar with delays and stuff. It's like that stuff is it's textural. So
yeah. So after you had the Toni Braxton kind of gig, and you still work with her a lot now, what was some of the other ones that you were doing sort of at the same, or why don't you tell us about Beyonce? How did you get that gig?
I met that camp, a buddy of mine, Omar Edwards, who's Jay-Z's MD. and we've toured together. I played with Mary J. Blige. I toured with Mary J. Blige for quite some time, and that's where I know Omar from. And he actually introduced me to Beyonce's musical director, a guy by the name of Derek Dixie. And Derek just calls me out of the blue one day some years back, and he's like, "Hey man, you don't know me. My name is Derek, and I'm working with Beyonce, and we have some things going on. Just wanted to if you be interested." And I think it was funny because this was like, I think this was Derek's like first like big kind of break too. So the next question, he was like, "Hey, do you know some other guys that would be interested?" I was like, "Sure." So it was pretty funny, man. But yeah, that's just kind of, once again, everybody's connected in one way or another. So
Yeah.
But yeah, so I just started working with her, and it's been some years now. So
Yeah, and you've also co-written some stuff, right? Or you've written some stuff
yeah,
that she's recorded.
We did. In fact, her Lemonade album, which won a Grammy.
Yeah,
I was on that album. I played on a couple tunes and then co-wrote one of the tunes as well. But it was like a pseudo country tune on there called Daddy's Lessons, which it's Beyonce doing like a country thing, so it's not real country, but it was like, it was fun, very novel. But the Dixie Chicks, they actually started covering that tune in their show, and this is a great segue. We ended up doing a performance on the CMAs of that tune, and I was able to meet the Dixie Chicks through that. And I hit it off with Natalie. She lives not too far from me, so I started working with them based upon that. It was like, so it's funny how everything is connected to the next thing that's connected to the next thing. You know what I mean? So
yeah. And one thing that's really interesting, that I think that you exemplify in a really in a really great way, is that every time I see you, you have the best attitude, and I don't think that you're just doing it for me. I think that it's one thing that we meet a lot of younger artists, in the showroom and stuff like that in Burbank, and guys that are trying to do what you do, and I think there certainly is something to be said about sort of your approach to people in life and in general, that certainly makes it more palatable and makes it easier for you to continue to be hired, and for people to like you and want to work with you. And do you think if there's any, it's just an observation that I've made, but what do you think is your, kind of maybe Erick Walls's, advice to a guy that's coming out of music school right now, whether that's Berklee, whether that's, SC, whether that's, MI, and they want to be doing what you're doing? What do you think are sort of the primary tenets to kind of put you in the best position to be successful?
Well, it's such a, when we look at our profession, in music, we represent such a small percentage of people. It's 8 billion people on the planet. And if you were to narrow it down to guitar players that are actually working professionally, it's probably such a small number,
Sure.
So, with that said, I don't take any opportunity for granted. I respect from the smallest to the biggest of things. We keep the same level of respect there, realizing that it doesn't have to be you. There's 8 billion people in the world, and if you have the opportunity to play with a Beyonce or somebody, you're the one guitar player that's up on the stage at that point. It's like, so when you're able to kind of really break it down and look at it from that angle, like, it doesn't have to be you. So be thankful, be grateful, do good by your gift, and your gift to do good by you. That's basically how I look at it, man.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
It's just it's a blessing to be able to do this, and I say God has shown me great favor, but I don't take it for granted. And I'm just as thankful today, as I've ever been. So
yeah.
And I'm really excited. I'm genuinely excited about the future.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I've encountered, you know, some guys in the past, you know, that seem a bit jaded, and you know, but
Yeah.
you know, the gift of music is so powerful, and to be able to use it, you know, to impact lives. I mean, it has so many healing, you know,
Yeah.
properties and qualities. So it's something to definitely be. You protect your gift, but you also want to use it to its fullest, and
Yeah.
never get beside yourself, and never get to a place where you think, you know, it's about you, and you know. So that's basically it, man. That's
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I certainly see that, you know, that you still also seem to keep a hand in a lot of different things, you know, like I presume that you've always been playing at your church as well, you know, and it's, you know, I know that some people they get busy, they get preoccupied, and they sort of just become sort of tunnel vision on being a professional musician, and they don't have a lot of diversity in sort of the musical experiences that they have, and sort of the communities that they work with, and how important do you think that is to kind of like be able to still maintain sort of, you know, musical relationships in different aspects?
Well, you know, for me, you know, the church serves multiple purposes, but you know, that's been my first music school. You know, the church teaches you something, you know, gives you musical sensibilities that can't be learned anywhere else, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, that given, like I've learned the greatest amount of information, you know, it just taught me so much my playing. And it, you know, to be honest with you, it's the only thing that keeps my musical mind sharp. You know, I play at a very renowned church here in LA called West Angeles Church of God in Christ. You know, Stevie Wonder's a member, a lot of notable members, and you know, but you know, the choirs won Grammys, you know, a very rich musical history they have there. But you know, that place has, you know, been such a foundation for me, like to be able to work out ideas. And you know, the
Yeah.
music is very progressive, so it keeps the wheels turning. So
Yeah.
you know, if it wasn't for that, you know, I don't think I'd be able to, you know, it's funny because when I'm able to take the skills that I've acquired in the church outside of the church, it gives me a whole nother edge. You know, when I play with guys that don't have that background, it's generally the, you know, the statement, you know, and I do a lot of, you know, I was like around Christmas time, I did a tour run with Indina Menzel from you know, she was fresh off of Frozen too. She's the voice
Right.
of
Right. Yeah.
you know, Frozen. So
Yeah.
she did a Christmas album, and it was big band. Ron Fair, he produced and arranged and conducted the orchestra. You know, so big band. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
horns, and it's legitimate Christmas music, Bing Crosby style. So it's swinging, everything's moving fast. You know,
Right.
but she personally asked me to play because I was doing some other TV show, and she's like, you know, you have a different, you know, it's a different thing that you're doing. You know, the notes are the same, but you know, I'm like, I knew exactly what she was talking about. It's
Yeah.
that thing that I've learned, you know,
Yeah.
from sitting, you know, on bandstands in churches for all these years, and it really does give you a bit of an edge, like
Oh yeah.
you know.
Yeah. I
So
mean, you
yeah,
you, you learn how to groove, you know,
yeah,
so much, because yeah, it's hard. You can play the same notes and not make them groove, and it's there's a palpable difference, I think, in terms of
absolutely,
how it's perceived, you know, from the audience standpoint.
indeed, indeed.
And certainly the artist notices those
Yeah, I mean, it's like,
idiosyncrasies.
yeah, I mean, you know, you know, in that setting, everything, you know, we call it the Holy Spirit, but it's, you know, it's the heart.
Yeah.
It's heartfelt. So when you're playing stuff, like the people, the church crowd is pretty hardcore too, because they're not moved by just mediocre playing, like, you know.
Yeah.
They're not dancing unless you're doing that, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
you got to
Yeah.
give them something that they can feel, you know. So, and
Yeah.
that's really what it boils down to. And it,
Yeah.
you know, I definitely early on, you know, playing in that setting, you know, and not having it, you know, it's like I've been told to turn it down, or we good. We don't.
Yeah.
So, you don't want that to happen. You know what I mean?
I'm sure that's been a lot of years since anybody's told you to turn down like that. But yeah, I mean, it's Paul was saying the other day when I was talking to him, and I was asking him like, about guitar players that people should be aware of, and he talks about you, and he said, Eric is playing the hardest music that there is to play, and it was specifically talking about, the stuff that you're doing with Kojic. And he was like, this is the hardest music to play. A lot of times it's not even notated, and these guys are just like feeling it. And it is really complicated. There are, key modulations and, all these different sort of like hits that you have to understand, and crescendos and all this stuff. So certainly you have lots of fans and reverence outside of just me here.
Yeah. He's, for him to say that, that's like the highest honor ever, man, because, that got means so much to me. He's been so influential, in my plan, but, this man.
Yeah. What does the rig difference look like for you if you're doing something at church versus you're doing, the standard kind of like somebody's hiring you to do Erick Walls, say Toni Braxton? Is it the same rig, a different rig?
No. I try to choose the gear according to the music, So at church, a lot of that stuff is, we're using basically, two tones, a really nice clean tone, and I'll play solos, so generally some type of pedal, some type of overdrive pedal, and I use light delays and maybe chorus here and there, or maybe wah, but very, very basic kind of stuff. So at the church I use they have like the 100 watt, I think the twin amp from the 90s. I mean, it's super loud.
Is it the one with the red knobs?
No, not the one after, the blackface model.
Okay.
And I'm assuming it's probably the same wiring. I know the red knob version, but
yeah,
it's the next one.
Okay, just really linear.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a great amp. It's a great amp. It's just really loud, and I have to kind of be loud, even though everything's mic'd and stuff.
Yeah,
that's a big band. When you're competing with B3 that's on 10, and bass and Pro Tools and all this other stuff that's going on, you kind of need a little bit more volume. And we're not. Well, I'm not on ears there. I think the drummer might be, but
yeah.
So, that's that. But once again, the music kind of dictates what I'll use. In Tony's gig, I'll use when I'm backlining stuff out. I'm generally in stereo, so it'll be like a couple of deluxes. I don't need a lot of volume for it. But,
yeah.
Just something that's clean that I can kind of do a lot with.
Yeah.
And even if I were to tour with her using my own stuff, I generally have like a Fender style amp, or like I use car amps. Steve Carr, big shout out to Steve. Been a fan of his for years. But I have a Slant 6V and Impala.
Yeah.
A Slant 6V, that's more so like a deluxe on
yeah.
And the Impala is based off from like a Bassman, like a 60s Bassman.
Yeah.
Like a master. So between those two, if I'm running stereo, I have a really nice contrast. One's chimey and one's on the darker side. So able to cover a lot of ground with those.
6V is great. Man. That's what Michael Thompson used.
Yeah. It's funny. I think so. Steve is from North Carolina, and there's a store there in North Carolina. Well, it used to be there. It was called the Music Loft.
Okay.
And this had to be maybe 97 or so, maybe 98. I remember going into this store and seeing the Slant 6V, and it was one of the first production models, that he had built. That was, in the marketplace. And the guitar guru there is a guy by the name of Eddie Berman.
Eddie Berman, yeah, and then he went on to do what was called the Indoor Storm.
Indoor Storm, and then Sound Pure.
Sound Pure, yeah.
Yeah, so Eddie, great guy, but he's like, man, gotta. And Eddie's always, you know, he's always been, you know, in the know of what's hip and what's cool, you know. So if Eddie said it was cool, I had to, you know, and it was like, it was literally the best clean tone I ever, you know, heard at that point. And so, you know, I hadn't met Steve at that point. So, you know, fast forward some years later, I bought a Slant 6V because that was the amp. That was like, that's the one I have to have.
Yeah.
And then I met Steve at a NAMM show, and then we hit it off. So, you know, we were friends for a long time. But
they're fantastic.
Yeah.
They're fantastic.
So, but you know, that's one style, you know, for R&B, kind of some pop stuff. And then if I need a little bit more edge, I'll end up using maybe like an AC30, you know, more pop rock type stuff. I'll use like AC30s and stuff, just to, you know, that mid range. If I'm not so much focused on, you know, that tight bottom end, you know, I can get a lot of stuff done with AC30. But then, you know, depending on who it is, like, you know, especially, and depending on where we go in the world, you know, I'll use a Kemper, you know, simply because of, you know, just the differences in power. You know, you go to some countries in Europe, you know, the power is dirty, and if you're, you know, doesn't matter how well of a rig you have, you're gonna have some funny stuff going on. So, you know, I'll use a Kemper just, you know, for the consistency. And I have some great, you know, the Kemper's only as good as the models that you're using in it. So you know, but that's a great tool, you know, tool to use as well.
What about you know, everybody knows about your Grosh guitar. How'd that thing come about? Because you know, that's kind of like the one that I always think of you with.
Man, such a beautiful instrument. It's funny, when I moved to LA, I think there might have been a store back home called Fat Sound. They carried Grosh.
Oh yeah, I remember Stu. Stu is the guy there.
Yeah, but it was Grosh guitars at that time, or me being younger. It was nothing that I batted an eye at. It was like, it just looked like a Strat clone, and I could care less. I had a really nice Fender, like, at the time, and you know, I was like, but when I moved to LA, I started seeing Groshes everywhere. A lot of the guys, like the cats, they had Groshes. I'm like, that's that generic looking guitar that I mean. Like, so I never forget, I went into a store in West LA, which was West LA Music, and they had a selection of Groshes there, and I picked it up, and I'm like, this neck is phenomenal. Like, and then the more I learned about, you know, Don's history, you know, from Valley Arts, you know, Don worked at Valley Arts for years. Yeah. That's where he got to start. It started out, I'm like, this is not the super modern Strat, and this is not the super retro Strat. It's right in between, and that's exactly what I needed. Yeah. So, you know, that was like, you know, I found the one that I think the one I have is maybe, it's a 98 or so.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like
natural relic.
Like, yeah, you know, natural. Yeah, that thing is, it's been around the world and back, and you know, I've definitely, it's definitely seen its share of action. But you know, what a beautiful guitar. I mean, you know, Don does great work, and you know, he's a friend of mine. I think he's out in Colorado now, and
yeah,
talk to him every once in a while. But
yeah,
he does some amazing
work. Yeah. Yeah, they're great instruments. You know, when I was talking to Michael Thompson the other day, he said that one that he had that he used on all the, you know, I mean, he used a Grosh as the Strat on a lot of the stuff, especially the live stuff. He had the other performance, I forget what the guitar, the one that looks like just looks like a really straight up 50s Strat. But you know, I think also on like I don't know if you remember that live Babyface album in New York in maybe 96 or 97. Has that Grosh on. He said he sold that guitar.
Yeah, he told me. He said he
traded it or something.
He paid for his website. He gave the guy the guitar for
his website. Yeah.
I laughed. I was like, wow, Michael.
Yeah.
You know, but hey, you know,
Yeah, well, Michael is you know, he's a generous guy, and I mean, I'm just surprised. I mean, you know, that he would give that one
Well,
seemed
you
like,
know, someone like him, he can make any guitar sound great, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
But
yeah,
you know, although those are special guitars, he has his way with. You know, I've seen him pick up a wide, very selection of different types of guitars, and it still sound like Michael Thompson. So
yeah. No, of course.
there's that.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about that some people have mentioned in the comments here is about how you develop sort of your hybrid picking style, and that you're one of the few guys that uses you know, thumb pick. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny, and I mean, it's actually kind of a silly answer to it. Um, my very first guitar was an acoustic guitar, so me learning was me learning on acoustic guitar. I used to always drop my flat pick into the sound hole of the acoustic guitar. So where I'm from, there's quite a it's a sizable, little bluegrass scene. We have this bluegrass festival that goes on there. And I mean, you talk about like really serious picking and stuff. So never forget, I saw some of those guys at one of the festivals I attended one year when I was younger. I saw some guys playing, with thumb picks. And then, some of the it's a style of guitar playing where like some of the gospel guys, it's called like vessel pool, and it's basically just open tuning. And there's another guy that played in that style that used a thumb pick, and just the light went off. And I remember I was out with my dad at a music store, and they had a display of. I was like, I want to get some of those picks, and I just kind of fell into it. I don't use the correct, like, some of those guys, they're using, multiple fingers. And my thing is more so just pointer and thumb, for the most part. Although when I'm playing acoustic or like some type of intricate part, I can incorporate other fingers. But,
Right.
it's just kind of one of those things. And I've been doing it so long, it's just, it's kind of second nature, but it's really unique because it allows, the thumb pick is a little darker in tone for these style thumb picks. These are Dunlop large, but they're a little darker in tone than, say like your regular medium Fender flat
Right.
pick. So that contrast with my finger gives a nice, it's a nice balance. And the dynamics that you're able to, kind of achieve when you're playing by using the two, it's pretty, it's pretty cool. So, a lot of my single line stuff is, is a hybrid of, downstrokes with the thumb pick and then upstrokes with the pointer. So and it's chicken picking in a way, but it's a little different. So, but yeah, that I mean, it's as simple as that, but yeah, it just kind of happened.
Yeah. No, I love it. All right, now this is the part of the interviews I've been doing where I ask about Erick Walls's recommended gear and equipment. I want to go through sort of guitars, amps, and then certain pedals. So let's start first with guitars. It sounds like you recommend Grosh. You got a PRS there.
Yeah.
What do you recommend to players as far as they want to get good tone? What do you like these days?
I mean, it's so much stuff out there. I'm the type of player that finds something, kind of sticks with it. But playing a wide range of musical styles all the time, calls for multiple tools. So this particular guitar, this is a guitar I've had for quite a few years. This is the hollow body cutaway hollow body 2 PRS, which is a really versatile guitar. It's fully hollowed, but yet it's versatile enough where I can get it kind of jazz boxy, and I can even play rock on it. So I've done quite a bit with this guitar. But of course the Grosh, something, having a single coil guitar with like humbucker in the bridge, I think is a really good move.
Yeah.
The Grosh, the setup, and I have it on multiple. I have a couple of Fenders with the exact same. These are it's Lindy Freleng Blue Specials, and I'm not sure what the humbuckers are, but they're all the same. All the guitars that I have with that setup are all the same pickups, just different necks and stuff, different woods. But anyway, yeah, single coils with a humbucker, and a splitting humbucker is a even more bigger plus as well. Instead of a second tone knob, we have a blend pot that takes the front and the back like out of phase to give you kind of that telly type of sound. So, really a guitar like that, you can get about 10 tones out of it.
Yeah.
So that's a great guitar. I have Les Pauls, 335s, arch chops, just really the music dictates what I'm using. But, if I'm taking a couple of guitars, generally like it's like the Grosh or that Strat style guitar, and some type of fully humbucking guitar. I have a PRS, is another really cool PRS that I've been using for years, a Swamp Ash model, and I believe they discontinued it some years. Oh, they definitely discontinued it some years back, but it's kind of in that family that the Grosh would be. It has the two humbuckers, but it has like a Seymour Duncan, like I'm not sure.
Yeah, one of those like blade pickups,
yeah,
right?
one of those blade, and then it has it splits, so you can get all the chimey. It actually might be probably the most versatile guitar that I have. I think the humbuckers are McCarty, so if you know that the McCarty model, those pickups are excellent. And then that Seymour Duncan gives a nice, just that very nice modern glassy kind of Strat tone. So so that's basically it for guitars. But it's personal preference, but I just try to be able to cover as much ground as I possibly can, and those kind of guitars allow me to do.
Yeah. And then what about for amps? What do you think is what's the gold standard for you?
Once again, like I said, it just depends on the gig. If I'm backlining an amp, or if I'm doing the stereo thing, it's deluxe reverbs. If I'm doing like a mono setup, I actually enjoy super reverbs or Vibro Kings for that matter. If they're rentals, if you can get a Vibro King, that's a great amp, and AC30s for certain types of things. I record with JCM's Marshalls from time to time for heavier stuff, but I don't really play that type of amp live. So
right.
But yeah, just basic stuff. Deluxes, Kings,
Vibro King is always such a weird one for me because of the 310s.
Yeah,
and it has this interesting impedance. But actually who had one, if you like Vibro Kings, Tim Marco,
Tim.
he has a head of
wow.
a Vibro King, and there's not a lot of them out there. The only other guy that I know that has any heads is Gary Clark Jr. And so he has a head one, which makes it a little bit more versatile. So you don't necessarily. But I think the impedance is weird. I can't remember if it's like 6 ohms or something like. It's either like 3 ohms.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a unique amp. But man, those things, if you find, like, I really haven't played one that doesn't sound good, but they're not all created equal.
Yeah,
like it's a couple of like the ones here in LA at like the rental places, Center Stage or SRR. Like the SRR, it's funny that you said Gary, because we did a tribute to Stevie Wonder, like a Grammy thing, and I was playing with the band and Gary was playing as well. But they have this red one over at Center Stage, and that's like the one you want to have, and I got it before he did. He's like, "Hey man, that's but it's a great amp. I really wish they would reissue those, but
Yeah, there's some bugs in it that are kind of known now about it, and some of it can't really be mitigated because of where the reverb is.
Yeah,
but it also has a sound, so that I think that there's certain people that definitely dig them. I remember having one because when I was in college, I remember that John Mayer had one. I really liked his tone, so I thought, oh, well, I'll just get a vibro cable. I'll be there. And so I found one on Craigslist that was, I don't know, less expensive. But I ended up selling it, at some point. But I didn't at that point. I didn't employ the Walls methodology of keeping all the gear you bought. What about in terms of pedals? And I want to kind of go by category. Do you have like a compressor pedal that you think is the one?
Yeah, I mean, I've been using for years the SP, the exotic, just simply because of the footprint. But it's a great compressor. But the functionality, the mix or blend control that it has I think is brilliant. I've yet to play another compressor with that footprint that is comparable. I have others. I was a big Keeley fan for years, and then it was a company out of I want to say maybe Austin called Eden Analog.
Mm-hmm.
They had this one, but it was big. It was called like the cold comp, and had like the medical symbol on it. So it was
okay.
Like a thing. But that was but it was just huge, and it was kind of poorly built. I think I ended up breaking. I still have it, but there's something weird going on with it.
Yeah.
But no, definitely the SB is like my go-to. I have a few of them, and I'm the type of player. I'm pretty much using compression at all times. So
yeah. What about for overdrive and distortion?
Well, I've been using what is the Ultraphonics?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the one? Yeah,
yep.
The Ultraphonics. I really dig that for my like over the top solo kind of tone, in your face. I've been so I use that one. I've been a fan of the original Full Drive.
Yeah, I remember you had
the original, the blackout one.
Yeah.
And I've had, the one I've had, or the ones, I have a couple of them, but the first one I got, I've had it maybe over 20 years at this point. But
yeah,
that's such a sound, it's and it works. It doesn't work with every guitar. Like I prefer it with humbuckers, obviously, but it's got such a it's a great sound. That one, that was a little I don't know, I guess it's like their Marshall in a box type of thing, but Tech 21 had this pedal called the Double Drive, that, and I have one. I only have one of them, and something's funny, something's going on with the on-off switch, but that's a great little sounding Marshall kind of clone in a box. And yeah, I've used that extensively, like on a lot of recording stuff. It's on the radio, so it's like that's a great little pedal. But also, if I'm needing like a really, really like different flavor or distortion, I love yours, the Dynamic. I use that quite a bit for more so rhythm, like kind of rhythmy type of stuff. But,
yeah, it's good for some of the heavy rhythm because it's kind of scooped out. It doesn't have a lot of mid range, so it can sometimes fit kind of well behind without sounding like it's too in your face.
Yeah. But those four pedals, I mean, I'm able to do so much. If we're your what is it, the clean? What is it, the clean?
Oh, the boost.
What's the silver one? What's your
the steel string.
The steel string. I found great use for that pedal in just like a mild. I use it more so as a boost, but it's breaking up a bit. It's pushing the amp. So when I'm using Fender style amps, it kind of interacts with those very well. So I really enjoy that one. So I throw that into the bunch as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all those honorable mentions.
Yeah, I mean, it's real. I wouldn't say it if I wasn't using it.
What about for like a chorus? You kind of have a sleeper chorus that you like.
Yeah. Well, the one that I use the most is on the board that you did is the Malaiko.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people don't know about this, but once again, the thing that drew me to it was this footprint. It's same size as like the SP and all those exotic pedals and like the TC electronics tuner, but man, such a lush.
Yeah, it was
lush analog, and I really prefer my chorus pedals to be mono. So it's a mono chorus pedal that has, it's a little on the darker side, but with a Strat, which is what I use, chorus with. It's a very nice contrasting balance. So it's a great, great pedal.
Yeah, I can attest. I was impressed. I mean, I always knew that the pedals existed, but I hadn't really heard one in close up. And we were kind of comparing it. I remember when you were over at the showroom, we were comparing it to a few of the other analog choruses out there, and it really holds its own.
Yeah, it's a vibe. It's a vibe for sure.
Yeah, and I think the mono chorus is big.
Yeah, and that's a great pedal. I have. And I guess going back to the 90s, the C, I guess the CE5 or CE4, the analog one.
The chorus ensemble.
Yeah, and that's the chorus sound as far as I'm concerned, Yeah. But I love that one in mono, with the lows rolled back and the highs dialed all the way, up.
Yeah.
That's a great chorusing type of pedal.
Yeah.
So that's another one. But those are kind of in terms of, if we're not using studio, gear, pedal format, those kind of my two.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one thing that people don't realize a lot with stereo modulation in general is typically the right side of the stereo image is just phase inverted. Yeah. And so it can sound really bizarre sometimes if you have a mono system or you're not running in stereo and you use some of these summing things. There's points depending on how it's built, you actually won't get any signal at all. I mean, right. Because it just cancels out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
I rely on effects for the stereo spread, not the chorus.
Yeah. So, yeah. What about for delay? What do you liking?
Well, I have this guy right here.
Oh yeah. That's the best. The 999.
The 999. I mean, it's not really usable in terms of me gigging with it, but recording with it. This is this is the sound. I mean, I tend to, lean towards darker tones. So this is like the most earthiest.
Yeah, Bucket Brigade, analog delay. Yeah, those are great.
It's amazing. But my live rig consists of an H9. H9 for all of my delay needs. That's the ultimate pedal as far as I'm concerned for effects. I don't think. I mean, it's been out maybe like six years or so.
No, they're fantastic. I have one, and this is what when I was talking with Paul, he's like, "Oh, I tell my students if you have to save up for one pedal, it's the H9."
Yeah, well, I totally agree. I concur. I mean, it's not too much you can't do in the realm of delays and reverbs and spatial type of effects with that with that pedal. It's not too much you can't do. So once you really dig, a lot of people. I love to tinker with my settings and stuff. So once you really start getting into the presets and stuff and really tailoring it, like man, you can do some amazing things.
Oh yeah. What about for reverb?
Well, I have a few reverb pedals. There's I guess we're talking about another sleeper. I think it's the RV7, the hardwire. It has a lexicon chip in it.
Yeah.
And that's like a pedal. I've had it since it came out, and it's
those are amazing.
Yeah. So that's a great, and it's funny. I got it simply because, you know, I'm not a brand whore, but I saw the lexicon. I saw lexicon written on it. And I said, you know, for however much it costs, I'm like, I'm not losing out. It doesn't matter. Even, you know, so, but no, that's a great one for, you know, it has a lot of useful tone. It even has this like ambient modulated reverb setting, or, you know, in it that is in stereo. It's to die for. So, you know,
if you like that one, Eric, you have to try the Polera as well, which was Digitech.
yeah.
I don't know if you've tried that one.
I haven't tried. I'm aware of it, but
it looks hideous. But it is also a lexicon. It doesn't have the lexicon logo on it like the RV7 did.
Okay.
Because at that time, I don't believe that Harman owned Lexicon, or maybe they just started owning Lexicon.
Right.
But the Polera has a very similar sort of profile in terms of the sound. But it all has those Lexicon models, and really kind of has, I think it's the closest that you can get to the PCM series lexicons in a pedal format. So definitely check them out, because right now they're discontinued. But I found one new on Amazon for like $109.
Okay, I definitely have to.
Yeah,
I have to go seek that one out.
That one's a sleeper for sure.
All right.
All right. Well,
yeah.
We've gone through amps, we've gone through guitars, we've gone through the pedals, and this has been really cool. I want to be respectful of your time. We're about 80 minutes in at this point.
Time flies when you're having fun. Huh?
Yeah, that was really cool. I really appreciated you know, kind of hearing a little bit more about your story. I mean, certainly we've talked quite a bit you know, about this, you know, before any of this was ever recorded in our interactions, but I think it's really great to sort of hear kind of the arc and how you got to where you are now, and what's sort of like, I guess the last question I want to ask you is kind of what do you think is going to be the pivot for musicians now that so much of the opportunities for live performances is curtailed, at least for the foreseeable future? What do you think is sort of the way that musicians need to sort of reinvent or pivot in order to make this workable?
Well, I mean, I definitely feel like, you know, whatever it's going to be, you know, it's technology driven at this point. You know, I think with all that's going on, the level of just interaction and collaboration is at probably an all-time high. You know, in the last few months, my workload here has been pretty substantial, like more so than it would have been otherwise. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I you know, I don't know exactly where it's headed, but I definitely think that, you know, by us utilizing, you know, these technology tools is going to provide platforms for us to really, you know, do some creative things. And I don't know, you know, from a live standpoint, I don't know if that, you know, consists of, you know, live stream concerts or whatever, but there's definitely going to be some way to really fine tune this where it's like, it's special, you know what I mean? Yeah. Where it's like, you know, I mean, and I guess, you know, when you really look at the advantages of the technology that we're using today and like the draw to it, it provides access. Like, you know, in days gone by, we didn't have access to people that, you know, we looked up to or, you know, really admired. Sure. So in that regard, it's really moving things forward. Now it's nothing for you to be able to get on Instagram Live and hear John Mayer talk and, you know, all, you know, anybody you've ever kind of looked up to that's right. Tech savvy, you know, like, so, you know, it's providing a level of access that we haven't had, you know, prior to this. And for those who, you know, were kind of lukewarm with it, they've been forced to, like, you know, dive in completely. So I think that's a good thing. You know? Yeah, it's definitely, you know, creating a more close-knit community, musical community. So
yeah, I agree. Well, Eric, this has been wonderful. And again, I really appreciate your time and your willingness to sort of share your stories, give your recommendations. And I sincerely appreciate your friendship and getting to know you better and doing Zoom here with you today.
Oh man, well, the pleasure is all mine. I appreciate you for having me. And this
of course.
This is special, man. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah. And give your family my best. And I hope to see you in the showroom at some point in the near future.
The very near future, the
whether
very near
we're,
safe future.
whether we're in hazmat suits or not.
Right.
All right. Well, have a great Memorial Day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Same to you, Mason. Thank you, man.
All
Take
right.
care.
Bye-bye.